The Nativity Story by Angela Hunt, adapted from the screenplay by Mike Rich, narrated by Renée Raudman. Copyright 2006 by New Line Productions, Inc. This unabridged audiobook is published by arrangement with Tyndale House Publishers, Inc., and was produced in the year 2006 by Tantor Media, Incorporated, which holds the copyright thereto. Prologue. With one hand on her hip, Lavinia Dressler inhaled a deep breath and surveyed the spreading chaos. Two of the three wise men were pounding out Heart and Soul on the grand piano, while one of the shepherds attempted to tie the belt of his bathrobe to the cow's tail. The two halves of the cow, a freckle-faced 10-year-old and her equally speckled brother, shoved and pushed, refusing to stand near each other, while the lamb kept wailing that her costume made her nose itch. Lavinia blinked at the commotion. Whatever had made her think she could pull this off with only one dress rehearsal? She clapped for her cast's attention, then nodded at a watching parent, Arlene Jessup, if memory served, mother to the wise man who kept trying to tickle Joseph's neck with straw. "Can you help me establish order in here?" Arlene rose from the front pew and snapped her fingers in her son's direction. A couple of other parents followed Arlene's example and waded into the confusion, pulling characters, animals, and angels into position. Turmoil, Lavinia reminded herself, was the risk one took when working with children and animals, and probably why she had neither children nor animals of her own. "All right," she forced a smile as a headache began to tap on her temple. "When Mary and Joseph kneel by the manger, the rest of you will come in humming Silent Night. Once everyone is standing in the proper spot, we'll sing. Everybody clear on that?" She glanced at the three magi, who shuffled in the straw next to a band of bathrobed shepherds. Tommy Andrews, the tallest of the wise boys, lifted the lid off his mother's crystal candy dish and sniffed. "Tommy, do you have something in your bowl?" The grinning boy tilted the contents in her direction. "Want a Jelly Belly?" "No, thank you. And I'm sure the wise men didn't bring candy to the baby Jesus, so let's lose the jellies before tomorrow night, okay? Parents, can we make sure the wise men aren't carrying any surprises?" Arlene and the other adults nodded. "Good." Lavinia clasped her hands and gave the young thespians her brightest smile. "As you sing, children, I want you to look at the baby Jesus. Mary, I want you to hold on to the baby as if he's the most important thing in the world. Can you do that for me?" Jessica Harper, who had been chosen to play the Virgin, nodded, her blue eyes glowing. She tucked a strand of golden hair behind her ear, then clutched the doll to her chest as if he were the last available sweater at a Nordstrom's 90% off sale. Lavinia sighed. Jessica meant well, but she had had no experience with babies. Joseph looked as if he had rather be out skateboarding than standing beside an overstuffed manger. The Magi knew more about Nintendo than stars, and though the shepherds could operate a computer, they couldn't find their way to the restroom and back without trailing straw down every hallway in the church. But though her young actors may have lacked life experience, they knew this Christmas pageant. The holiday play had become a tradition at their small church. Every year the pastor awarded the leading roles on the first Sunday after Thanksgiving. Christopher Stock, playing Joseph, had memorized the most Bible verses at middle school camp, and everyone quietly acknowledged Jessica Harper as the congregation's prettiest middle schooler. "All right now, everyone stand perfectly still." Lavinia held up her hands, framed the stage between her extended forefingers and thumbs, and for a moment was struck speechless at the charming tableau. Baby, manger, Mary, Joseph, shepherds, magi, animals, and angels, all fresh-faced, scrubbed clean, and ready to smile for the camcorders. How had this story become so attractive? She lowered her hands as a more realistic image supplanted the artfully arranged actors. a reeking animal pen in the dark of night, crowded by livestock and rats. "Children!" The cast stopped fidgeting as Lavinia sank onto the stool in the center aisle. She took a moment to gather her thoughts, then looked out over the sea of immature faces. "I'm so glad you're willing to be a part of our nativity play. You know your lines, you know the story. Some of you have seen this drama a dozen times." Her gaze fell upon the blank-eyed doll in Jessica's pale arms. "But our Christmas pageant tells only a small part of what happened in Bethlehem. Mary and Joseph had experienced fear and exhaustion by the time they arrived in the city. The shepherds were the last people anyone expected to receive an invitation to visit the newborn baby, and the wise men traveled many dangerous miles to find the infant king." Lavinia shuddered, imagining the perils of a first-century journey through untamed desert territory. Then she lifted her gaze to find Mikey Jessup watching her. The pint-sized wise man's eyes had gone as round as globes. What was she thinking? These children were too young to hear about the terrors of travel and bloodthirsty tyrants. They didn't need to learn about shame and scandal and oppression, not yet. Never mind that the Virgin Mother had been about Jessica's age when everything happened. Lavinia shook off her thoughts, slipped from the stool, and lifted her hands. "On the last verse of Silent Night, you wise men exit toward the piano, remember? Shepherds and animals, you follow them. Angels hover around the baby Jesus until the music stops." As their pure, youthful voices rang among the rafters, Lavinia shivered in another moment of vivid imagination. All was not calm on that long-ago evening in Bethlehem. All was not bright, for desperation shadowed the hearts of men, and evil fully intended to blot out the light. Chapter 1. At the sound of voices, Mary pulled a square of linen over her hair, then scooped up the other 3 pieces of cloth and sprinted across the furrowed ground. All 4 girls had left their veils on a rock by the side of the road, certain they would be reaping alone in their families' fields. They had been left to themselves for most of the morning, but now the sun stood high overhead, and the voices that had reached Mary's ear belonged to men. "Naomi," she hissed, cupping her hand to her mouth. "Rebecca, Aaliyah, someone comes." The other girls, who had been laughing and calling to one another as they cut the tender heads of barley from the stalks, stopped and turned. "Who comes?" Naomi wanted to know. "I'm not sure," Mary said, tossing a rectangular cloth to her, "but they're men." Rebecca and Aaliyah left their rows and hastened to smooth their veils over their tumbling tresses. With her back to the road, Mary felt for the edges of her own rough veil, then tucked a rebellious hank of hair behind her ear. No virtuous young woman would dare be so immodest as to publicly approach a man with her hair exposed, but each of the 4 friends had only recently entered womanhood. The habits of freewheeling childhood clung to them like vines. Rebecca smoothed her veil and wiped a trickle of perspiration from her forehead. "How do I look?" "You'll look better without seeds on your brow." Mary reached up to wipe a speckling of barley from Rebecca's damp forehead, then nodded. "You look fine." "I only hope whoever it is deserves the trouble we're taking," Naomi groused, repositioning the leather strap of the bag on her shoulder. "If it's Josiah and his friends—" Mary suppressed a smile as the girls moved toward the road. Naomi always made a fuss when Josiah came into view, and Mary suspected that Naomi complained far more than necessary. Surely it wasn't natural to spend so much time thinking about a boy unless you liked him more than a little. Her thoughts scattered as a knot of young men crested the hill, Josiah among them. Mary saw Naomi blush when he looked her way. "Greetings," Rebecca called to the group. "Come you to the fields to work or to play?" "To work, of course." Josiah scowled in Naomi's direction. "As long as you girls don't get in our way." Naomi stepped forward, her eyes blazing above a demure smile. I do believe the 4 of us can work faster than the—" She paused to count. 6 of you. Josiah's scowl deepened. "Tend to your family's plot, woman. Your father sent me out here to keep an eye on you." Naomi placed a hand on her hip as her lower lip edged forward in a pout. "And what business have you with my father? I can't believe he would speak to you, let alone permit you through our courtyard gate. He speaks to me often." Josiah left the other boys to step closer. "And he groans and moans most piteously because he has a headstrong daughter, one who will almost certainly never be married. I will be married, but certainly not to the likes of you." Naomi's words would have stung if not for the smile on her lips and the challenge in her eyes. Mary stood back, watching in amused wonder as Naomi took off across the field, barley spilling from her bag with every step. Not willing to be dismissed, Josiah took off after her, catching the girl before they had run half the length of the field. "I've seen her run faster," Rebecca whispered. Mary laughed, and something stirred in her heart as Josiah caught Naomi by the waist and pulled her down. "Should we help her?" Aaliyah asked, her voice small. Mary kept her eye on the pair but shook her head. "They're only playing." Rebecca turned, a look of wonder in her dark eyes. "Do you think he's really been talking to her father?" Mary watched as Naomi and Josiah smiled at each other. Then she shifted her gaze to the older boys, most of whom had already waded into their families' fields. "I think our fathers have begun to talk a lot about the future. We have begun our monthly courses, so we are old enough to make our fathers anxious about finding us husbands and providing a dowry." The 3 girls stood in silence under the cloud-heavy expanse of sky. Then Rebecca whispered what Mary had been thinking. "Sometimes I wish I could remain a child forever." Chapter 2. With sure and steady fingers, Gaspar peeled the leather wrapping from the clay tablet and peered at the cuneiform writing. "Are the words too faint?" Melchior asked, leaning over the edge of the table. Gaspar's lips puckered with annoyance as he continued to squint at the tablet. Aware of his student's irritation, Melchior settled his aging spine against the back of his chair and forced himself to exercise patience. Late afternoon sunlight streamed through the open window and spangled the stone floor and tapestried walls. Across the chamber, on another table, a water clock revealed the passing of time, yet another reminder that each man had been given a finite number of hours to spend in the pursuit of knowledge. Yearning to do something with his hands, Melchior picked up a scroll and blew the dust from it, then watched as the tiny particles rose in a column of shimmering light. "Think, Gaspar," he urged. "Does any of it apply? Any clue we find may be the final piece." Gaspar exhaled an exasperated breath through his teeth and thrust the clay tablet away. "This is nothing but foolishness." "This is discovery," Melchior countered. "The words of a prophet have been proven too many times for me to ignore them." Gaspar gave him a black look, but Melchior had seen too many of Gaspar's frowns to be offended. He tucked his hands into the sleeves of his robe and tipped his face toward the sun. "Please, tell me what you were reading. You know my eyes are not what they once were." Gaspar sighed, then drew the tablet toward him again. "I see him," he translated, his voice slow and deliberate. "But not in the present time. I perceive him, but far in the distant future. A star will rise from Jacob, a scepter will emerge from Israel." Gaspar lifted his gaze. "From Israel. But, Melchior, surely this is not what you think. This is the prophecy of Balaam, son of Beor, and he was no son of Israel. How can we trust anything he would say about the Hebrews?" Melchior closed his eyes. "How does a wise man know anything? Men know what the true God reveals, and God has revealed his truth." He opened his eyes and spread his hand toward the window, indicating the room as well as the world beyond. "In his created order, in everything." Not waiting for a reply, Melchior pushed himself up from his chair and passed into Balthasar's study. The younger man, who had made a specialty of astronomy, sat at a table cluttered by manuscripts, scrolls, and star charts. 2 astrolabes and an armillary sphere weighted down several curled and yellowed papyri. Balthasar, who had doubtless heard every word of the exchange in the room beyond, picked up the armillary sphere and turned the circles on their axes. "A star will rise from Jacob," he said, using his thumbs and forefingers to maneuver the zodiac and colors above the lumpy gem representing the earth. "But a star could represent any noteworthy person." So the prophet goes on to clarify, "A scepter will emerge from Israel," and a scepter could only mean a king, Melchior finished. Balthasar lowered the sphere. "Quite a king, if the rest of the prophecy is to be trusted. A king who will subdue all of Israel's enemies." Though Gaspar continued to mumble in the distance, Melchior clasped his hands and sniffed with satisfaction. "I thought as much." Besides, Balthasar's attention drifted back to the sphere on the table. "The prophet's words speak to a particular pattern I've been watching. Jupiter has tonight conjoined with Venus in the constellation of the Lion, so some important royal event is about to happen among the Jews." Melchior crossed his arms. "If what Belteshazzar wrote is true, the Hebrew Messiah could come within our lifetimes. Perhaps this is what his God is revealing through the stars." The mention of the ancient sage quieted Gaspar's muttering, as Melchior had known it would. Generations before, Belteshazzar, a Hebrew known to his people as Daniel, had mastered the wisdom and learning of the Chaldeans, surpassing even his teachers in knowledge and understanding. He attributed his wisdom to the one true God, an acknowledgment that puzzled some counselors of the royal court while it frustrated others. But Belteshazzar had so impressed the king of Babylon that he had been declared Rabmog, chief of all wise men. None of the chiefs who followed, not even Melchior, had deciphered or thoroughly explained the mysteries of Belteshazzar's prophetic writings. But Melchior had not stopped trying. "Esteemed teacher," Gaspar stepped into the smaller chamber, "you must set aside this obsession with Belteshazzar. His words are a mystery, yes, but perhaps they are not meant to be understood." "If we were not meant to be understood, why would Belteshazzar have written them? He was not one to waste words." "If he wanted us to understand, why didn't he say what he meant? The man spoke in riddles." "He spoke in code, and any code can be unlocked if a man has the required keys." Melchior closed his eyes in concentration. "A period of 70 sets of 7 has been decreed." He quoted the ancient prophecy from memory. "For your people and your holy city to put down rebellion, to bring an end to sin, to atone for guilt, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to confirm the prophetic vision, and to anoint the most holy place." Now listen and understand. 7 sets of 7 plus 62 sets of 7 will pass from the time the command is given to rebuild Jerusalem until the Anointed One comes. To his left, he heard the sound of Gaspar pouring a cup of wine. "Belteshazzar wrote of God's plan for his chosen people," Melchior continued, "and the Hebrews have long influenced the lands and people of the civilized world. The Rabmog wrote of 70 sevens, 62 sevens, and 7 sevens. I have determined that the 7s are years, but the rest of the prophecy still baffles me." Gaspar stepped into Melchior's field of vision and lifted his cup in a wry salute. "Nothing baffles you for long, my friend. You will either solve the riddle or drive us mad with your conjectures." The old man glanced at his cynical protege, then nodded at Balthasar. You have long been interested in the Hebrews. Perhaps you can come up with an answer in Belteshazzar's text." Balthazar picked up another faded scroll and ran his ink-stained fingertip along a line of script, his lips moving as he silently read the words. When he had finished, he lowered the scroll and shifted on his stool. "In one sense," he said, speaking in his careful and deliberate way, "the meaning of the Rabmag's foretelling is obvious. For Artaxerxes issued a decree for the rebuilding of Jerusalem in the 20th year of his reign. The Hebrews completed the rebuilding of Jerusalem 49 years after the decree was given. Hence, Belteshazzar's first 7 sets of 7 have been fulfilled. 62 additional 7s must pass before their Messiah will be revealed, but only 449 years have passed since Artaxerxes' edict." Melchior folded his hands. "Go on." "So, if Belteshazzar's words can be trusted, within 34 years the Hebrews' anointed leader will arrive." "Excellent calculations." Melchior nodded at his student. "But you have neglected to keep reading. Listen, if you will." He picked up the ancient scroll and squinted, forcing his aging eyes to focus on the familiar text. "After this period of 62 sets of 7, the Anointed One will be killed, appearing to have accomplished nothing." He lowered the scroll and cocked a brow at Balthazar. "The appointed time refers to the death of the Anointed One, not his arrival." "Bah!" Gaspar lowered his cup to the table. "The first prophecy speaks of a king who will subdue Israel's enemies. How can this king, if Belteshazzar wrote of the same man, be killed before he accomplishes anything? Impossible." Balthazar shrugged. "There are too many unknowns for us to make an exact calculation. A man may die at any age, so how can we know when he will be born? We would need a reference point, something solid." Melchior stroked his beard, then shifted his gaze to the armillary sphere. "We have a reference point. The heavens." From the corner of his eye, Melchior saw Gaspar shake his head, but Balthazar picked up the armillary sphere and began to manipulate the rings. Why shouldn't Belteshazzar's invisible god leave messages in the natural order of his universe? For instance, if Venus and Jupiter draw near each other in the skies above Jerusalem. He moved the band going around the sphere, the ring representing the zodiac, then stopped. By the slight squint of his eye and a sideways movement of his jaw, Melchior knew the young astronomer had arrived at a conclusion. "In how many years should we expect a king?" Balthazar gave his mentor a bright-eyed glance. "It will not be years, my esteemed friend." Chapter 3. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, Adonai alone. Zechariah closed his eyes as the leader continued the morning prayers and called the faithful to worship. For over 40 years he had made the pilgrimage from Judah to Jerusalem so that he might serve his course of service in the temple. Now, in the autumn of his life, his spirit had wearied of the journey. He and his wife Elizabeth had lived blameless lives before God and man, observing the mitzvot and ordinances of Adonai. And for what? He had never been chosen to serve in the holy place. Elizabeth had never been blessed with a child. Despite their many prayers, despite their devotion to Adonai and the law, Zechariah and his wife would die poor and childless. His neighbors called him doubly blessed, for he was a Kohen from the order of Abijah, and Elizabeth had descended from the priestly order of Aaron. But of what use was a godly heritage if a man could not bequeath it to sons and daughters? The prayers concluded, and those who had previously offered incense discreetly backed away. Zechariah looked around, realizing with a pang that he was the oldest man remaining in the circle. Like a virgin daughter for whom no man asks, he stood with the younger priests and waited, once again, for the Spirit of Adonai to move in the casting of lots and pass him by. His heart thumped against his rib cage when the leader motioned for him to remove his head covering. He obeyed, feeling gray and vulnerable, and lifted his hand with the others. Since the law forbade the counting of persons, the leader would begin with the bare-headed priest and count fingers. Some men held up 4 fingers, others 2 or 3. Because the offering of incense was the most sacred duty a priest could render, Zachariah felt a humble man should extend only 1. The leader had already counted off 2 lots. The first, which had occurred early in the morning, selected a priest to cleanse and prepare the altar. The second designated the priest who would approach the holy place to offer the sacrifice, trim the candlestick, and clear the altar. The leader announced a number, 71, and fingers fluttered and settled as he began counting again, moving swiftly around the circle of upraised hands. Zachariah lowered his gaze, unwilling to watch. He had learned to soften disappointment by anticipating it. So in a moment he would back away, put on his headgear, and slip into the congregation where he would pray with hundreds of other sons of Israel. 68, 69, 70, 71. Zachariah's throat went dry when the leader's bulky form filled his field of vision. "You, Zachariah." Awe filled the leader's voice, not for the chosen Kohen, but out of respect for the honor. "Hashem, blessed be he, has chosen you to offer incense before the altar." Zachariah nodded, not certain he could trust his voice to reply. More than 50 Kohanim stood with him in the hall of hewn, polished stones, yet he had been selected to perform this most important task. The privilege of offering the incense, symbolizing Israel's accepted prayers, could not be repeated in a man's lifetime. Yet once was enough. After this day, Zechariah would be called rich, for the Torah promised blessing to the Levites who served God by offering incense. With his work assigned, Zechariah stepped out of the circle, his thoughts centering on his task. "They will teach your regulations to Jacob," he murmured under his breath. "They will present incense before you and offer whole burnt offerings on the altar. Bless the Levites, O Lord, and accept all their work." Soft ripples of congratulation reached his ears as the leader counted off the 4th lot, which would select a priest to place the sacrifice on the altar and pour out the drink offerings. Zechariah had stood in the hall of hewn stones more than 80 times, so he knew what to do. As soon as the leader finished the final count, Zechariah would choose 2 friends or relatives to assist in his sacred duty. One would clear the altar, removing everything that remained from the previous evening's service, and reverently leave the holy place by walking backward. The second assistant would step forward with a bowl containing live coals taken from the altar of the burnt offering. He would spread the coals to the edge of the golden altar, then walk backward from the holy place, leaving Zechariah alone to fulfill the responsibility God had given him. Holding the golden censer, he would stand on bare feet in the soft light of the 7-armed candlestick. He would look toward the altar glowing with red-hot coals and situated before the heavy veil separating the holy place from the Holy of Holies. He would wait until he heard the worship leader proclaim that the time of incense had come. Then he would step forward and place the incense on the altar as near to the Holy of Holies as possible. Like the prayers of the people in the temple beyond, a fragrant cloud would rise heavenward. Zechariah would bow low in worship and reverently retreat as the people in the courtyard chanted, "Appoint peace, goodness, and blessing, grace, mercy, and compassion for us and for all Israel. Bless us, O Father, all of us as one, with the light of your countenance. For in the light of your countenance have you, Jehovah our God, given us the law of life and loving mercy and righteousness and blessing and compassion and life." When the prayers had been offered, Zachariah would turn at the top of the stairs. Every eye would be focused upon him as he lifted his
Sample complete. Ready to continue?